Let's begin with the language comprehension section of the exam. On the whole, I would say that this section is fairly easy. Even the passages are not challenging because the questions are pretty direct. The rest of the questions related to grammar and vocabulary, even if you have looked at grammar in a fairly cursory way and learned the basic rules about, say, subject-verb agreement, tenses, pronouns, you should be able to handle it. Let's get started. Now here we have a grammar question. Pick the correct option to complete the following sentences. What we need to understand is that this is testing subject-verb agreement. So I'm also going to cover the rules that you need to know in order to figure out which are the correct versions of the verbs that we need to use. The first sentence says, gold and silver, precious metals. Now, obviously, we need to figure out the verb. Should we say is? Should we say are? Could there be something else? Now, if you look at the options, there are only two choices, is and are, which means that we have to figure out whether our subject is singular or plural. Now, the rule says that whenever we combine two subjects using and, barring a few exceptions, our subject is going to be plural, which means that our verb should be are. Now, let's take a look at the second sentence. The ship with its crew lost. Now, here, my subject seems to be the ship with its crew. But are we going to consider this a singular subject or a plural subject? Because if you look at the options, we have a choice between was and were. This is a rule that you need to pay attention to. Whenever we have expressions such as with, along with, accompanied by, and so on, these expressions are supposedly parenthetical, which means that they are not going to add to the subject. The subject is still going to be the ship only. Now, the ship is singular and therefore we should say was lost. Please remember, whenever we add something to the subject using with, along with, accompanied by, as well as, it does not necessarily affect the subject. Your subject is still going to be the first part before these add-on expressions. So, we could by now start guessing at the answer, but let's take a look at sentence 3 as well. No nook or corner left unexplored. Now here, is our subject going to be nook or corner? The rule says that whenever we have two subjects being joined by or nor, the verb agrees with the closer subject. So here, the closer subject is the word corner, which is singular. So we would say, was left unexplored. Now, in the fourth sentence, similarly, when you say neither my friend nor I, the closer subject is I, and therefore the relevant verb is going to be am. So, we now have our answer, which is going to be option 4. Now, here we have a vocabulary-based question. The word is not very difficult. We must have heard of it somewhere or the other. Choose the word that is closest in meaning to the following statement. A medicine to counteract poison. So, a remedy to a poison is what we are looking for. Most of us will be able to see that the answer should be antidote. Because aquatic obviously has to do with water, like aquatic life refers to life in water. Now, the word agnostic is usually contrasted from the word atheist. An atheist is usually a person who is pretty sure that God does not exist. But an agnostic is a person who's not very sure of whether God exists or does not. They believe that there is no real way to know. Now, the last word here, anthropology. So, whenever there's a logy at the end, we know it is the study of something. Anthropology is the study of anthropos, which is equal to human or mankind. Therefore, we can say that anthropology is the study of humanity in all its aspects. Culture, society, physical development, evolution, everything pretty much. So, our answer obviously is option 1. On the whole, a very simple question. Now here, they're asking us for the meaning of the expression catch-22. If you have heard of this or if you have read the book that this expression has arisen from, then you will know. So let me give you a background. So catch-22 normally refers to a situation which is pretty difficult and virtually impossible to get out of. It has originated from a really famous book written by Joseph Heller. The book is called Catch-22 and 22 is a number. In this book, there is a rule that says that a pilot can be relieved from going on dangerous missions if they were considered insane. So on the whole, it seems to be a very simple regulation, but there is a catch. There is another condition which makes it impossible for anyone to escape. The condition is that in order to be declared insane, the pilot has to request to be grounded. And the moment you make this request, it is proof of sanity. Therefore, you are not insane. Therefore, you will not get any relief. So, we go back to our original meaning of catch-22. It is a situation you cannot escape because the rules or the conditions contradict each other, and therefore escape is impossible. Keeping this in mind, let's evaluate our options. Now, the first one is pretty close to what I have just talked about, so probably the answer. The second one comes close. It does talk about a difficult task, but it doesn't really talk about why the task is difficult or the fact that you cannot escape from it. So, can't be option 2. The third one says that the problem causes another problem. So, it's sort of a chain of problems, but again, it does not talk about the possibility of escape being impossible. The fourth one talks about desperation, but not this inescapable situation again. So, our answer would have to be option 1. Now here we have another vocab related question. Pick the appropriate meaning of the term proscribe used in the following sentence. The word proscribe is often contrasted or sometimes confused with the word prescribe. But if you look at the sentence, it's easy to figure out the meaning. Just use the odd one out strategy. Arms culture should be proscribed by the government. Now, arms culture is supposedly not a very good thing. So the government is supposed to prevent it in some way. This is my understanding of the statement. So, could I pick option 1? No, because if you allow it, then you're promoting it or you're at least supporting it. The second one, prescribe, is to suggest. So, again, it is a positive word. Prohibited is very similar to prevented or banned. So, this could be our answer. And defended, again, is similar to supporting this particular culture. So, the reason I said odd one out is that 1, 2, and 4 all talk about supporting a practice. Only one of them talks about preventing it, and therefore our answer is option 3. Now, this question is going to test your knowledge of tenses. Let's take a look at the first sentence because we have to pick the correct one. I have passed the examination last year. Now, have passed is actually present perfect tense. We can use the present perfect tense for something that is complete, but the time of completion has not been mentioned. So the moment we say last year, we cannot use the present perfect tense. So option 1 is out. Look at the second option. I passed the examination. Well, pass is present tense again, so we can't use option 2. The third one, I am passing the examination last year. Am passing is again present continuous, so we can't use that. The fourth one is simple past. I passed the examination last year. So the key to solving this question is the word or the phrase last year. This means that the event has been completed in the past, which means that we have to use the past tense. Now, please remember that we use the simple past when there is some reference to time, last week, yesterday, last year, and we want to say that something was done at that time. However, if we are simply talking about the completed status of an activity, but we don't want to say when it was completed. For example, when we say, I have read this book, I have watched this movie, then we can use the present perfect because now we are indicating that because I have completed this activity, somehow it affects my present. So please note, the present perfect is used for completed activities without a time reference. In this case, however, we cannot use it. So our answer is going to be option 4, which uses the simple past tense. Now we have a passage to deal with here. Luckily, the passage is pretty short and the questions are fairly direct. So we're not going to read the whole passage, though I would encourage you to maybe pause the video and read it on your own. What I am going to do, however, is to point out the things that you should notice while reading it. So I'm just going to simplify this entire paragraph for you. When we start reading it, we clearly know that we are talking about religion and we are saying that it's a little difficult to explain or define religion. So this will be our first point. As you keep reading, you will see that because it's kind of difficult to explain or define or even point to the origins of religion, many theories or perspectives are there. And it says, regardless of how many perspectives are there, it is very clear that religion is a pretty important part of our lives. It also says that there is a difference between the Western and the Eastern perspectives. The Western perspective on religion was theistic, which means that it kind of focused on divine elements, whereas the Eastern views focused on ethics and natural elements. So this is kind of a summary of the first paragraph. Now let's move on to the second one. Now here We are talking about the derivation of the word religion, and in fact, this was something that I learned while reading this passage. It is derived from the Latin root religare, and it means to bind fast. So it talks about how religion binds people together. And after that, it says that the definition of religion is influenced by multiple factors. For example, socio-cultural, psychological, political, phenomenological, and interpretive, and so on. So there are many different types of definitions of religion. And that's the end of the passage. So even though the topic seems a little complicated, on the whole, there isn't much that you have to struggle with, particularly because the questions are fairly direct. So now let's take a look at our first question. Which of these statements are correct with reference to the above passage? Very simple question because most of these things are directly stated in the passage. Let's take a look at our first statement. Religion is one of the most sensitive aspects of human life forms. So this we can see is mentioned in paragraph 1, which means that A is definitely correct. So is B. The same paragraph mentions that religion is a purely human activity. So A and B are confirmed. Let's talk about C now. Religion doesn't bind the members of a community together. If you remember paragraph 2, you would see that the passage actually contradicts this point. Religion does bind members together. So ultimately, we have to say that A and B are correct, but C is not, which means that our answer would have to be option 1, A and B. Question 7 is also fairly simple. In which tradition, religion is seen as a response to the experience of the natural powers? So, of course, this should say in which religion is religion seen. But nevertheless, let's focus on the intention of the question and not the grammar. So, if you look at the first paragraph, you will find the answer to this question. It says that there was a difference between the West and the East. The West had a theistic sort of an orientation, whereas the East focused on natural factors and ethics. So, the answer here obviously has to be Eastern tradition because it is explicitly stated in the first paragraph. Question 8 again finds an answer directly in the passage. The meaning and definition of religion depends upon the following factors. If you look at paragraph 2, you will see that the meaning and definition differs according to so many things. Socio-cultural and psychological background, so that will confirm that A and B are correct. It also talks about the political setting, so A, B and C are correct. And by the time that you get there, you know that you will have to pick the fourth option because we can't pick only A, B and C. But in any case, the passage does mention phenomenological factors as well. So our answer here is going to be all 4 A, B, C and D. Now question 9 seems to be a vocabulary based question, but the answer to this can be easily derived from paragraph 2 of the passage. Let's take a look. This paragraph says, etymologically, the word religion is derived from the Latin root religare. So we are talking about the derivation of the word. Keeping this in mind, let's scan our options. So we're not talking about the derivation of the idea of religion. We are talking about where the word is derived from, which means that we can eliminate option 1 and option 2. Origin of human life, which is option 3, again does not really relate to what is said in the text. So our answer will have to be option 4. Origins of words and their meanings, and this is exactly what the word etymology means. Now we have moved on from the passage, and this is an independent question. This is testing your knowledge of phrases or idioms. It says, replace the phrase in italics in the given sentence from the options given below to make a grammatically correct sentence. It says, I don't think you need to explain the situation. Your conduct is speaking itself. So we have to replace the speaking itself with one of the options so that it is correct. What we want to say is that the situation is self-explanatory. If we look at option 1, the conduct cannot speak to itself because that doesn't make any sense. The second one, speaks for itself, is actually the expression we are looking for because when something speaks for itself, it is so clear and obvious that you don't have to explain it. Now 3 says, your conduct has been speaking. This again seems to point to a very literal translation. So conduct cannot speak. And the fourth one, speaks about itself, also is not a valid phrase. So our answer has to be option 2. This question is testing our knowledge of foreign phrases. Now, when we say foreign phrases, we are primarily talking about either Latin phrases or French ones. Of course, we have borrowed expressions from other languages as well, but I would advise that you definitely focus on these 2 languages. The first phrase here is carpe diem. Now, this originated a long time ago in the work of the Roman poet Horace, but recently, or more recently, it was made famous by a movie called Dead Poets Society. So if you watch that movie, this is a phrase that is very frequently used. It's meant to motivate and urge you to enjoy the present or seize an opportunity while it is there. Now, obviously, A will have to be matched with 4. So even if you can do this, you'll get to your answer. But let's also understand what the other expressions mean. A faux pas, which is a French expression, is some sort of an embarrassing mistake, usually in a social situation. You might say something that might be offensive, or you might trip and fall, which of course is embarrassing. So it is some sort of a blunder. Magnum opus, it's a very common expression that refers to the best or the most important work of an artist. So it could be a writer, it could be a musician, any of these. For example, the Mona Lisa is an example of one's magnum opus. Now, the last expression is prima facie. Prima facie means on the face of it, literally, or on first impression. So if we match these columns properly, or even if we match the first one, we should get our answer as option 3. Here we have a fairly easy question, although some of us might be in doubt about a few things. So let's talk about it. Read the sentences given below. I do not know whether he will come or not. So whenever we say whether, we often follow it up with or. This is to imply that there are 2 possibilities. So the first statement, in fact, is correct. Now, if the first statement is correct and we are fairly sure of it, then we can eliminate at least option 2 and option 4. Now, all we need to do is to check the second one. I do not know that he will come or not. When we just say it like that, it seems to be okay. But this statement is incorrect. I could have just said, I do not know that he will come. But the moment we add or not, it becomes incorrect. So, the first one is correct, but the second one is incorrect, which is why our answer will have to be option 1. Now, here we have a very basic question on active and passive voice. One of the things we need to understand is that in passive voice, we interchange the subject and the object, usually. Of course, the verb also changes. We might add a few prepositions, but this is information that we should be able to recall from school. When you're eliminating options, let's make sure that we do not change the message. The meaning should not change. We also should not change the tense. So if the original sentence is in the present tense, then we should not switch to the past or the future. So in solving this, that's all we really need to keep in mind. My mother cooks Italian food every Sunday. Option 1 says, every Sunday Italian food cooked by my mother. We should be able to spot the fact that is missing here. It should be is cooked. Now option 2 has corrected that mistake. It looks fine. Now here, whether we put every Sunday at the beginning or the end really does not matter so much. So far, I'd say that the second one looks all right. The third one changes the tense. Italian food is being cooked by her every Sunday. Also, please notice that we do not mention the mother here. We don't know who the pronoun her refers to. So option 3 cannot possibly be right. The fourth one changes the tense again. Italian food was cooked by my mother. The original sentence is in the present tense. There is no need for us to change it to was. So our answer would have to be option 2. Very simple question. In this question, we have to identify which part of the sentence has an error. The sentence has been broken down into 3 parts. It is possible that there is no error, in which case we would choose option 4. The primary objective of the essay is to draw analogies between the 2 work. Now, when we read it, we should spot that we are comparing or maybe saying that the attempt is to find similarities between 2 things. The moment we say between, it's usually going to talk about at least 2 things. But if you notice part 2 of the sentence, it says between the 2 work. We need to use a plural noun here, and therefore it should be works. So we have found our error. It's very easy. Nevertheless, it's always good to complete the entire reading. The 2 works addressing the common memories and trauma of dislocation. The sentence on its own presents a very complicated idea, but we don't really have to get into the meaning. We just need to spot the grammatical error. So, on the whole, very easy question. The answer is option 2. Here we have another grammar question, but this is a rule that we have covered earlier in the video, so I hope that you have learned from that one. Find out which part of the following sentence has an error. Neither he nor I are wrong. Sounds okay to one's ears, but there is an error. We need to remember that whenever we join 2 subjects with or nor, the verb agrees with the subject nearest to it. In this case, the verb is are and the subject nearest to are is I. So I would not say I are wrong, we would say I am wrong. And that is why part 3 has an error. So our answer becomes option 3. Now we have a parajumble here. On the whole, parajumbles tend to be time consuming, but this question has 2 advantages. First of all, there are options. Secondly, you don't actually need to form the entire sequence to get to the answer. Now, the first thing that we normally do is to figure out the topic sentence, the introduction, and that is very easy to see. So let's try and see how we would do that. P says, at other times, it's a spontaneous communication within a small group of people. When we say at other times, it means that we would have mentioned some other time before it. So I could say that in some cases, X is true, at other times, Y is true. So P is not a standalone sentence and therefore cannot be our starter. Q says, oral storytelling is an old, widespread and much loved tradition in many cultures. This could be our starter sentence. It is a standalone sentence. It introduces the topic, oral storytelling. So let's keep Q as a candidate. R says, this spontaneity. Now, for us to say this spontaneity, we should have mentioned spontaneity somewhere else. So here you might notice that P and R are related because P talks about spontaneous communication and R refers to the same spontaneity. So we could have found our first link. Now S says, it's sometimes a performing art that involves interaction between the storyteller and the audience. So S is a little too abrupt because we haven't really talked about storytelling yet. So we know that Q is the starter for sure. We also know that we have found a link between P and R. So the moment that we spot these 2 logical points, we get our answer. Our answer would have to be option 2, QSPR. Question 17 is vocabulary based, and here we are looking for a word to substitute this particular phrase, lasting for a very short time. Now what we need to do is to scan our options, of course, and eliminate a few. However, what I will also try and do is to see if there is any easy way to guess the meaning of a word in case I don't know the exact meaning. Let's take a look at the first one. Vulnerable. Now this is a very common word. When we are vulnerable to something like a disease, it means that we are capable of being harmed by it. So this is definitely not our answer. The second one, ambivalent. Now the word ambi typically means two. So what does ambivalent mean? It means that you have contradictory or mixed feelings about something, both good and bad, and therefore in the end you might not be very sure of how you want to feel. Then we have ephemeral. Ephemeral is not a common word, but ephemeral is the word we are looking for. It means lasting for a very short while. Synonyms for ephemeral could be fleeting or temporary. So the opposite would obviously be permanent or something that lasts forever. And then we have the word flamboyant. Now, I try to remember this word by looking at the first half of it, flam. Flam tells me that something is fiery, attractive, something that will generally command attention. Now, this is just a memory aid. It's not the exact definition of the word. So when we describe a person as flamboyant, it typically means that they command attention because of their style or because of their confidence or energy. But when we describe someone's clothes or appearance as flamboyant, it means that it is very colorful and showy or ostentatious. Nevertheless, flamboyant could be good or bad. Usually, a flamboyant person is just a type of person. We're not trying to say whether this person is good or bad. In any case, our answer would have to be option 3, ephemeral. Here we have a grammar question again. Identify which of the sentences are correct. The first sentence says, she was pouring water in the jug. Now, whenever we pour water, we pour it into something or we pour it out of something. So here the answer should be, or the correct version should be, she was pouring water into the jug. What we need to understand is that in and on generally just imply position. I am in the room means I'm already there. It does not really signify movement. But when we say that I am going into the room, it means that I am changing my position. And here, since the position of water is changing, into is more appropriate. B says, my father was angry with my brother. So we say that we are angry with someone, and this is absolutely right. Sometimes you might also hear someone saying that I'm angry at him, which usually is incorrect. So please remember, we're angry with people or we are upset with people. So B is correct. C says Rama has been living in Delhi for 1975. Now, has been living is present perfect continuous. When we use present perfect tense or the present perfect continuous tense, often it is to imply that something started at some point in the past, but it is still ongoing. So we should not be saying for 1975, we should say since 1975 to imply that Rama started living in some place in 1975 but is still living there. So this one definitely is wrong. The children laughed at the beggar. So we normally laugh at someone or we stare at them. There is no error here. This is correct. The patient was crying on pain. We normally cry in pain rather than on pain. Of course, if we were talking about a table or a bed, then we could have said that someone was crying on the table or on the bed. But that's not what we are implying here. So only two statements are correct, which are B and D. So our answer becomes option 1. Here we have to change passive to active. Again, let's remember that in doing this, we should not change the meaning of the sentence and we should not change the tense. So when I say change the tense, obviously if the original is in the present tense, we should not change to past or future. If the original is in the past, we should not change to present or future. But what we also need to keep in mind is that if the original sentence is in the simple past tense, then we should not change it to past continuous either. So with that in mind, let's get started. The original sentence says the child was looked after by the maid. In other words, the maid cares for the child. One says the maid looked after the child, which seems okay. Now in active voice, the doer or the subject is placed right at the beginning and the verb directly follows. But in passive voice, we normally interchange the subject and object. So here, the object, the child, has been put ahead of the subject or the doer. So please remember, that is basically what active and passive are all about, interchanging subject and object. Now, the first one is okay. The second one changes the meaning entirely. The maid was looked after by the child. Now, the child is not looking after by the maid, so this cannot be correct. The maid was looking after the child. 3 could be correct, but it kind of changes the tense. The original uses the simple tense. Option 3 says the maid was looking after the child. Now, this sounds correct, but remember, in changing from active to passive or the other way around, we're not supposed to change the tense. The original sentence does not use the continuous tense, but option 3 does. Was looking after is past continuous. So this is not allowed. Therefore, this cannot be our answer. The fourth one again changes the tense to the future. Will look after the child. So this is also not correct. Our answer would have to be option 1. Now, this is the last question of the section. Find out which part of the following sentence has an error. Now, this has to do with tag questions. A tag question is simply a statement followed by a mini question. We normally use tag questions to elicit confirmation or agreement. Now, there are some basic rules that we follow for tag questions. So, let's take a look at what those rules are. If you look at the original, the earth moves around the sun. When we say moves, moves is what we call the main verb. There's no helping verb here. So, what should I use in the tag question? Normally, the tag question uses the helping or the auxiliary verb. But what do we do if there is no helping verb? So this is one thing we'll need to figure out. The other rules that we need to be aware of is that if the statement is positive, the tag question is negative and vice versa. For example, if we say you're cold, it's an affirmative statement. So my tag question is going to be negative, aren't you? And in the second sentence, because we're starting off negatively, my tag question is going to be affirmative. So this is the second rule, very important one. The third rule, as I said, is that whenever there is a helping verb missing in the sentence, then we automatically use do, did, or does as a part of our tag question. And that's what we need to do here. The earth moves around the sun. We should not be using is. We need to say does. So our answer is going to be option 3, isn't it? Whereas we should be saying the earth moves round the sun, doesn't it? So with that, we come to the end of the language comprehension section. If you have noticed, most of it is related to grammar. So please brush up your grammar rules. Some of it is related to idioms and vocabulary, but then we know that the syllabus there is pretty vast. There isn't too much in terms of parajumbles or other forms of reasoning here. So if I had to pick that one area that I really need to improve to do well in this section, I would definitely say grammar. Wish you all the best.